that we're going to be together in the book of Proverbs. So this week, we will not meet next week, and then we'll meet the week after that. Then we'll have another week off as we prepare for Ecclesiastes and Song of Solomon. So a lot of things going on, but we're going to start to bring the book of Proverbs to an end. I'm so thankful for how patient you've been as we've gone through this book, because it is not the easiest. There are so many topics, so many things all going on together. And when we get done with all of this, if you go, you know what, I have a better idea for how we can go through the book of Proverbs, I'm all ears. But I couldn't find another way to address it except the way that we are. And one of the great encouragements to me has been John Tellis, who has done so much work behind the scenes in helping prepare these lessons and the summaries and whatnot. And his word of wisdom was just kind of clear. It's a unique book within a unique book, and it requires a unique approach, which is why we're going through it the way we are, even in an accelerated study of the Bible like we're doing in AC3. So with that, chapter 26, starting in verse 1. Like snow in the summer and like rain at the harvest, so honor is not fitting for a fool. Now, we'll see this idea of honor being on a fool a couple of times during our study today, and the idea is of you honoring the fool, you elevating, lifting them up to a place that it is not appropriate for them. Verse 2, like the sparrow that is to fluttering, and the swallow is to flying. So another SAT-style question, right? So an undeserved curse does not go forth. The idea is that it flutters around without finding a place to perch. So the bird keeps fluttering and can't find a place to roost. And we think about this undeserved curse. Put in your head what we saw with God protecting Israel from Balaam. Numbers 23, verse 8. Numbers 23, verse 8. When Balaam tried to curse Israel, but he turns to the people who hired him and go, how can I curse who God has not cursed? How can I curse the one that God has blessed? Here in verse 3. Now, verse 3 through 5 is one section on how to address fools. Now, we've gone through 25 chapters so far talking about fools, and don't be a fool, and this is a fool. And now we come to, now this is how you interact with a fool. How do you address a fool? Verse 3 here of chapter 26 forms the foundation for the response. A whip for the horse, a bridle for the donkey. So this is how to control that which you can normally not control. The horse is too powerful. The donkey is too stubborn. This is how you get them to do what you want them to do, how to correct their behavior, and a rod for the back of fools. What we see here is the idea is that you're not going to be able to rationally talk with them and to explain to them the errors of their ways, because a fool is what? Always convinced in their own mind that everything they do is correct. In the middle, we have this verse 4. This is how we should not respond to them. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you become like him, even you. So the idea of even you is somebody who has wisdom. You're seeking after wisdom. You want to know how to address the fool. Don't argue with the fool, otherwise people won't be able to tell the difference. Don't try to reason with them. Definitely don't play their game. Don't answer them the way they answer you. And the next verse tells us how we are to answer them. Now, the first part of the phrase is a little confusing because it says, answer a fool according to his folly. Wait a minute, I just read 4. It said, do not answer a fool according to his folly. So which one is it? What we need to do then is go back to verse 3. That tells us the lens to see verse 4 and 5 through. He says, you have to use a rod to correct a fool. That way, when we come down to verse 5, answer a fool according to his folly, or else he will be wise in his own eyes. The idea is, don't answer them according to their folly in the same manner that they live their life. Instead, answer them as their folly deserves. That's the idea. Whatever the consequence is, whatever manner you have to speak to them that way according to what they deserve, lest they be wise in their own eyes and think, well, everything I'm doing is great. Verse 6. Like cutting off feet or drinking violence, so is he who sends messages in the hands of a fool. You wouldn't give somebody a message and then cut off their feet and say, go run to the next town and bring the message. You would hamstring, you would impair your message before it even gets to where it is going. You're doing the exact same thing when you send a message by the hand of someone foolish. Verse 7. Like legs that hang limp from a lame person, so is a proverb in the mouth of fools. The idea is that they won't be able to use it. They just won't know what to do. We'll see this later on. Giving a proverb to a fool is like giving a thorn or a thorny bush to a drunk person. They're going to whip everybody with it. They're just going to swing it around, not worrying about who they come in contact with. Don't put a proverb in the mouth of a fool. They won't know what to do with it. Verse 8. Like binding a stone in a sling. So the idea here is that you have one of those good David slings. So you have a long piece of leather, and it's got the little pouch, and the rock goes in it. But then you take that route and you super glue it in place, or you bind it up so it can't let go. So that way when you go and you swing it around and you let go of the one thong so that it will sling out and the rock will go, instead of it, it's still inside the pouch, and now it's a danger to you. Doing something like this shows you don't know how to use the sling. It's the same thing as giving honor to a fool. This is an application of verse 1. It wasn't good there. It's not good here. It shows that you don't know what to do with honor when you give it to a fool. But here's another concept within it. 1 Timothy 3:6. 1 Timothy 3:6. Do not elevate someone to a place of honor or authority before they are ready. 1 Timothy 3:6. This is part of Paul's instructions to Timothy on how to establish people as elders. Don't make somebody who's brand new to the faith, who's not ready for this position, don't put them there before they're ready. Be slow, be cautious, be sure. Verse 9. Like a thorn that goes up in the hand of a drunkard, so is a proverb in the mouth of fools. Now, I already mentioned this, but don't think like a little tiny thorn in their hand. The idea is like a long vine with thorns in it. So almost like a whip, like a thorn bush, and they're just whipping everybody around. And it's like somebody who learns a smart word or learns a proverb, and they use it for everything, and you're like, that's not what the word means. It's not what the proverb means. Not everything means haste makes waste. Come on. Think about how you're using it. But they can't. Why? Because they're a fool. Verse 10. Like an archer who wounds everyone, so is he who hires a fool, or he who hires passersby. Don't just grab anybody for the task. Ask yourself, are they able? Are they called? Are they equipped? Can they do the job at all? If not, then you're like a person who just shoots arrows randomly everywhere, and everyone ends up with an arrow in the back. Verse 11. This is a very convicting proverb. Like a dog returning to its vomit is a fool reverting to its folly. And if you've ever struggled over and over again with a particular sin, and I say that tongue-in-cheek because we all have, then you know that this so accurately describes what it feels like. But there's joy within this, because God's grace is still sufficient for you. Don't give up fighting the good fight. God's not done with you yet. Verse 12. Do you see a man wise in his own eyes? Now stop right there. We just spent 11 verses talking about fools, except for one of them, but it still kind of talks about fools. Anyway, a fool is this, a fool is this, a fool does this, a fool does that. Then we get to verse 12. Do you see someone who's wise in their own eyes? There is more hope for who? A fool than for him. We've gone through all these verses about fools, and then we find out there's somebody worse. Somebody who always thinks they're right, who everything is justified in their own head. You can't tell them anything because they can rationalize anything to themselves. This is the culmination of all that came before it. As bad as fools are, this one is worse. Verse 13, a repeat of one of my favorites. A lazy person says, a sluggard is in the road, a lion among the streets. It's a repeat of Proverbs 22:13. In that place, it said the sluggard. Here it says a lazy person. We have the same idea between the two. A lazy person has an excuse for everything. Well, why couldn't you do this? Well, why couldn't you do that? Well, nothing was perfect. Everything was wrong. Verse 14. The door turns on its hinge, and a lazy person on his bed. Now, I love the idea of this. This is so descriptive. The idea here is that a person won't get up. But every time you come into the room, they switch positions. And they're like, oh, I am so close to getting up. I've turned all the way from my right over to my left. Just a little bit longer, and I'll finally get out of the bed. That's the idea. They keep going back and forth and back and forth. Verse 15, another repeat of another proverb. A lazy person buries his hand in the dish. He's too tired to return it to his mouth. That's Proverbs 19:24. 19:24, we studied that already. Verse 16, a lazy person is wiser in his eyes than seven wise people who answer discreetly. We have studied this repeated refrain multiple times. Proverbs 12:15. 16:2, that's 12:15 and 16:2. A fool, a lazy person They both have the same mindset. Both of them can justify whatever they do to themselves. What we see is the idea is not that you can either be a fool or you can be, verse 12, someone who's wise in your own head. You can be both. All of this can come together in one person. Don't be people like this. Verse 17. Grabbing onto the ears of a dog passing by is one who meddles in a quarrel that is not his own. Now, Carol's going to be mad at me because she looked this up during yesterday's teaching, and I've forgotten, but I think it's Lyndon Johnson. But you guys remember the president used to pick up the dog by the ears? Right. Okay. What? Oh, John. Okay. All right. I think Carol won't be too mad at me. Tell your mom I remembered. Yeah. But now that's bad enough with your dog. This is a dog that's just walking by. And you reach up and you grab the dog and you pull up their ears. What do you think you're going to get for your troubles? But a person who does this kind of thing is one who meddles in a quarrel that is not his own. How convicting is this proverb in our current day where people feel somebody said something wrong on the internet, I have to go correct them. Not every fight is your fight. Not every argument is yours. Don't make it your business to be the all-purpose police of the entire universe. Sadly, this applies to our beloved King Josiah, who in 2 Chronicles 35, picked a fight with Pharaoh Necho that was not his fight to fight. Here's the lesson of this proverb. Don't be nosy. That's it. Mind your own business. Not everything is your fight. 18 and 19 go together. 18 and 19 go together. Like a maniac who shoots firebrands, arrows, and death. So very vivid image, right? So is a man who deceives his neighbor but says, am I not joking? This is someone who goes out causing trouble and then goes, oh, I was just joking. I was just saying, I was being light. No, you weren't. You're causing chaos. You know, here's the thing to remember. It's not about you. Just because it was light to you and it didn't mean anything to you doesn't mean it didn't mean something to somebody else. Don't be so selfish. Consider the impact you're having on others. Verse 20 and 21 address the same topic, and it's an important one for us to understand, right? For lack of wood, a fire goes out. So that starts the premise. When you stop having stuff to burn, the fire will go out. And where there is no, whisperer, the gossiper, the backbiter, the quarreling will cease. When you get rid of the instigator, then the fight will stop. Diffuse contentions by ending the whisperers, the people who talk in the back corners. We saw this in Proverbs 22:10. 22:10, drive out the scoffer, and contentions, arguments will cease. And here we have the same thing. This is how you get it to stop. But this is why it's so important. Verse 21, as charcoal is to hot embers and wood is to fire, so a man of quarrels is to kindling, starting strife. This is why this person has to be put out. Well, this is church. They should be able to come here and be welcomed all the time. I don't know what Bible you're reading, but that is not what the word says. Paul's actually kind of clear when he talks to Titus about this. He goes, you know what? Go to them once, maybe 2 times, and if they will not stop, then they're to leave. It is very clear. We have it in 1 and 2 Corinthians as well. There's a place of humility when you come and gather together. Yes, come as you are, but be humble. And if you're not, then I'm sure there's some place that would be glad to receive you. Verse 22 explains why the whisperer from verse 20 gets a foothold in the first place. Because the words of a whisperer are like delicious morsels. Oh, they taste so good. Everybody wants to be in the know. Everybody wants to have secret knowledge nobody else has. Oh, well, they just told this thing to me. And that's how these kind of dissensions and arguments get started. But they don't stop with just being tasty on the tongue. What? They go down to the inner parts of the body. They affect the rest of you. They don't just stay on your tongue and that's all that happens. It's harmless. It's like, no, what happens is that you digest them. Everything else gets poisoned by what you took in. Verse 23, but like impure silver. Now, we have this chain going. We need to stop these contentions. The whisperer must stop. This is why they get a foothold. But the words are really like this. They're like impure silver, which overlays an earthen vessel. So are smooth lips and an evil heart. Do you see the chain? Now, the idea here is that we take the silver, and every other time we've studied it, you heat it up, you put it in the furnace, and it builds the impurities on the top in a layer. It looks like silver, but like it's dirty. And so you spoon that away until what's left is as pure silver as you can get. The idea here is that you're spooning out the pure silver and just leaving the dross, the impurities. but it still kind of looks like silver when it gets cool and gets hard. They take a clay pot and they emboss the outside with this dross. So from a distance, it looks good till you get close to it and go, what is this? It's a clay pot. It's not a beautiful silver vessel. Instead, it's garbage covering garbage. This is what it looks like. The person who has smooth lips and an evil heart. This is the whisperer in its final form. Verse 24 through 26 all describe the same person. Okay, this is a person who is your enemy, but they're pretending to be so nice. Verse 24, on his lips an enemy will pretend, but inside he will harbor deceit. When he makes his voice gracious, do not believe him. For 7 abominations, the idea is a complete set. The fullness of abominations are in his heart. Though hatred is covered with guile, so he's trying to cover it up, its evil will be exposed in the assembly. The idea is when it gets before everybody, everyone will know what it is. We'll see this later on in chapter 27, verse 6 as well. Never trust the kisses of an enemy. Do not trust their words. If you know what they are, believe them. If you already know what someone is, be smart and be shrewd. Verse 27, he who digs a pit, in it he will fall. And he who rolls a stone, so the idea is of like a trap, on him it will come back. We learned this in Psalm 7. Psalm 7. He has dug a pit and hollowed it out and has fallen in the hole which he made. Verse 28. A tongue of deceit hates its victim, and a flattering mouth makes ruin. If someone is a liar, what they're saying is they hate you. That is just the reality of what it is. Chapter 27, verse 1. Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what the day will bring. Another interesting idea in our day is social media, because everyone wants to tell you about the great plan that they have and how they're successful at everything, and everything is going according to plan. But what we see here is an application of James 4:15. James 4:15, do not boast about your plans for tomorrow. James 4:15. Instead, just say this: if the Lord wills, we will do this and that. Verse 2. May another praise you, and not your own mouth. Now again, we've seen this throughout the Proverbs. People who put on a good show. They want to seem rich on the outside, but they can't afford to pay their bills. All those things coming together. We have it here again. Don't praise yourself. Don't let someone else praise you. A stranger and not your own lips. If you're just a person of quality, others will sing you praise. But do not promote yourself. Proverbs 25:7. Proverbs 25:7. Don't give yourself the best place at the feast. Instead, just be humble. Don't promote yourself, but here's the other side of it. Don't go sniffing around for compliments either, because that's the same thing, trying to get somebody to praise you. Be satisfied with this. Your Father in heaven knows what you do and who you are. Let that be enough. Verse 3. Heavy is a stone and weighty is sand. I love the image of this. And I have a love-hate relationship with this one. Now, when I was in the Army and you're strengthening up soldiers to get them ready for the rigors of the infantry and carrying a rucksack, one of the things they would do is they would take sandbags, bags filled with sand, and put them in your rucksack. And I don't know what it was about the sand, but it almost seemed like the sand was heavier than any other thing they could have put in your backpack. And when you're carrying it in your rucksack, it almost seems to be reaching down to the ground and trying to pull itself towards you. Even if you put the equivalent amount of weight in bullets or mortar rounds or MREs or water or anything else, nothing felt as heavy as sand. There's just something about it that is so heavy. But there's something heavier than that. Here we go. The provocation of a fool is heavier than both of them. As heavy as a stone is, as weighty as sand is, there's something about a fool that just keeps provoking you and trying to start something with you. It's just hard to bear. The dead weight of it, the way it fights against you, this is what it's like to be antagonized by a fool. Verse 4. Cruel is wrath, and overwhelming is anger. Now, those are bad enough. But who will stand before jealousy? It's such an interesting proverb. Because the idea here is not godly jealousy at all. It's a jealousy that is envious and greedy. And because of that, it's never enough. If you unleash wrath, if you unleash anger, there's a place where eventually it'll burn itself out. Jealousy never burns itself out. And that, again, we keep coming back to it, but so many of the Proverbs keep ringing at the social media bell because we have kids being raised up right now, constantly seeing that this is the image of life, that nobody can possibly live, and it creates within them a hole that nothing will ever fill. Verse 5. Better a rebuke that is open than a love that is hidden. Here's the reality. A person would rather you openly rebuke them than be cold toward them. Even if you love them, because at least you would be paying attention to them. Again, we look at kids, and some kids, they act bad. Why? Because that's the only attention they get. And they'd rather have that than nothing at all. Verse 6. The wounds of a friend mean well, but the kisses of an enemy are profane. We talked about this already, Proverbs 26, 24 through 26. Do not be lulled to sleep by soft words from someone you know does not have a heart for you. It doesn't matter what they say. They are not on your side. But here's the other side of it. Trust hard words from someone you know loves you, even if they hurt you, if you know for sure that they love you. If they are truly your friend, appreciate how hard it was for them to say that word to you. Verse 7, really interesting one here. A bunch of different levels. An appetite that is sated, so you're full, spurns honey, so something that's sweet, a delicacy. But to an appetite that is ravenous, all bitterness is sweet. Now, it's an interesting image because in one way, the sated man here is kind of like a spoiled brat. They're so full, they don't even want the delicacy. They're like, oh, no, I'm good. They push everything away. But here's the other side of it. A person who is starved of attention, they appreciate even insults from somebody else. Because that's how starved they are. Anything is nourishing to them. If you're starving, you will embrace any compliment. It's consider it in light of verse 5. But here's the other thing, because this becomes a protection to us as well. If you are confident in the Lord, then you are like the man who is sated. If you're satisfied in the Lord, you will be able to resist even the honey words of the enemy. But a starving heart will cling to even any hope of love. Verse 8. Like a man that strays from it, a bird that strays from its nest, so is a man who strays from his place. So the idea of the bird is they're listless, they're lost, there's a lack of comfort when you're far from home. And we feel like this. Think about this when you go to a hotel. How many nights does it take to be in there before you finally have one good night's sleep? Usually a couple, if at all. Because why? Because it's not my room, and it's not my bed, and my bathroom's not right there, and all my stuff isn't where it's supposed to be. You don't feel comfort because you have strayed far from home. Verse 9. Perfume and incense will gladden the heart. So these are, some translations will say perfume and oil. The idea is of things that soothe you, either directly on your skin or soothe your heart when you smell it and you're like, oh, this just is a beautiful aroma here. And just like those things gladden your heart, the pleasantness of one's friend, so how good it is to have them there, is personal advice. They're able to give you counsel, to pour into your life, and that is pleasant to your heart. It gladdens you as well. Verse 10. As for your friend and a friend of your father. So this is not blood family. These aren't relatives. These are people close to your personal friend, a friend to your father. Do not forsake them. And the house of your brother, do not enter on the day of your calamity. Now, the idea is not go to your family, your blood family, when they're in trouble. Don't go there. No, the idea is better a close neighbor than a distant brother. So here's the application for us. Be there for church family when they don't have biological relatives nearby. If they're your family, then be family to them. Don't abandon those who are here just because they're not technically your blood family. And don't leave the family God has given you here just because, well, I'm actually related to them. Verse 11. Be wise, my child, and make my heart glad, and I will answer him who reproaches me with the word. So this is parent talking to a child. If you know your child is walking in the path of righteousness, and somebody comes to insult you based on who your kid is, you can respond with a word. You don't have to get upset. You don't have to get animated about it. You know your kid. They're doing what they're supposed to do. It makes it easy for the parent to respond to any who might try to bring an insult because their child has made it easy for them. Verse 12. When the clever sees danger, he hides. The simple go on and suffer. That's a repeat of Proverbs 22:3. 22:3. Verse 13, take his garment, for he gives surety to a stranger, and to an adulteress, so take his pledge. A repeat of Proverbs 20:16. And we see these repeats, and I'm mentioning so you can write them down to see as these keep going on, there's a reason why. He needs to keep bringing them up to us, just like he needed to bring it up to the next king. Verse 14. He who blesses his neighbor with a loud voice early in the morning, a curse will be reckoned to him. Now, this is that when you're trying to sleep in just a little bit, and your dogs, because you have bad dogs, start barking in the middle of the night, and you're like, whoa, you just stop barking. Stop making noise. Or the neighbor that comes out loud, and you're like, I'm just trying to have a little peace and quiet. The idea here is control yourself. Self-control. Be considerate and temperate. Not everything has to be turned up to 11 all of the time. 15 and 16 go together. They just so happen to come after this one about a person who needs self-control. I'm not saying anything, I'm just pointing it out in the text. Verse 15, dripping constantly on a day of heavy rain, and a woman of contention are alike. And restraining her, so trying to control her, get her to stop doing that, he restrains the wind. It's pointless. You can't hold on to the wind. And his right hand will grasp oil. Verse 17, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. Another reminder not to try to do this on your own. Verse 18. Okay, now we're going to have this image of a faithful servant a couple of times. This is a servant doing what they're supposed to do. He who tends a fig tree will eat its fruit, and he who guards his master will be honored. The idea here is of the servant who's doing what he's been hired to do. Being faithful, being responsible, doing what the master has asked. A laborer is worth their wages, and a hardworking farmer should be the first to share in the crops. 2 Timothy 2:6. 2 Timothy 2:6. And if you're tending to the fig tree and doing what you're supposed to do, guess what? You get to be the first one to eat figs. Verse 19. This is a very, very deep one. And I'm going to give you my best understanding of this one. As waters reflect face to face, so the heart of a person reflects the person. Now, when Jesus is talking to the disciples about washing hands and this and that, he says, listen, what goes from the outside into your mouth does not pollute your body. But what comes out of the heart pollutes the body. That is what defiles you. The idea here seems to be when you look in a bit of water, which is their early mirrors, right? Because they don't have mirrors like we do. Whatever you see there is what is going on. Face reflects face. What comes out of your heart reflects who you really are. And this is what we know from the Sermon on the Mount. Bad fruit comes out of bad trees. Good fruit comes out of good trees. Whatever comes out of your heart reflects who you really are. Verse 20. Sheol and Abaddon, so death or the grave, will not be satisfied. And the eyes of a person will not be satisfied either. Beware the wandering eye that fills your heart with an endless desire. There's no such thing as your eye ever seeing enough. Verse 21. Now, this is going to be a reflection of Proverbs 17:3. Proverbs 17:3. And in 17:3, we read this. The refining pot is for silver. So we see here a crucible is for silver. And a furnace for gold. And here we see again a furnace for gold. But in the other one it goes, but the Lord tests the heart. And the idea is through pain, through difficult times, through stress, he tests your heart. Here we see this. But a man is tested by what? The mouth of him who praises him. When we combine these two proverbs together, what we see is that God uses both to test a man. And if we're really honest, we're more likely to fail through the easy times than we are with the hard times. The pressure, the heat, it kind of tells you all you have is God and you tend to cling to him. But the praise, the good times, people telling you how great you are, that's the greater danger to you. And what we have in chapter 27 are two warnings here about seeking praise. The first one was in verse 2, and now this one in verse 21. Verse 22. If you crush a fool in the mortar with the pistol along with the crushed grain. So in our head, we kind of have this image of the little cup in the pharmacy, and he's got the little mortar, and he's grinding it up. For them at the time, because they're talking about crushed grain, they're thinking more of like the grinding stones. So you have one stone and then a big heavy stone that comes on. And they go, if you put the full in between those and you just smush them down, you can't drive the folly out of them. It will not drive folly from him, no matter how much pressure you put upon them. But here's the other part of this. This is why it is so important to try to drive out folly out of a kid while they're still young, while there's still hope. It's why discipline is so important when they're younger. 23 through 27 go together. Now, verse 23 is the main exhortation. It gives us our premise. And he ties back to the faithful servant we already saw tending the fig tree. But here, verse 23, it's a firm command statement exhortation. This is the expectation. He just says it like facts. You will surely know the condition of your flock. Your heart attends to the herd. Now, the idea is he's just flat out putting on you the expectation. You are to keep up with what it is that God has entrusted to you. I'm not even saying you should do this. I'm telling you, you will do this. You will know the condition of your flocks. The heart of your herds, you will keep them, or your heart will attend to the needs of the herd. We are to attend to that which God places under our care. And now here's why. Verse 24. For riches are not forever, nor a crown for generation after generation. It doesn't matter how much money you make, it will not last forever. And just because your parents made money and they handed it to you doesn't mean that you'll be a good steward, so you have to continually be faithful to what God has given you. Verse 25, when the grass is grown, then green growth will appear. So the idea is season in, season out. This season, everything dies out. The next season, it comes back up. So we have this ongoing, continual faithfulness. And the herbs of the mountain will be gathered. Lambs will be your clothing, and goats the price of the field. Now, this is why you need to be faithful. Verse 27 is the conclusion of the faithfulness that began back in verse 23. And there will be enough goat's milk for your food, and for the food of your household, and the nourishment of your maidservants. Lambs will be your clothing. Goats will give you financial liquidity, and there'll be goat's milk to sustain you as well. Not just you, your household, even those who work for you. But here's the great idea. The idea here is that we should pay attention to what God has entrusted to us, because our provision comes from how we keep up with that which God has entrusted to us. How do you tend to the resources that God has given to you? Chapter 28. This is the this or that chapter, and it's just kind of how I put it in my head. This does this, but that does that. Okay. Here we're going to see a real emphasis on wickedness in the nation in the chapter. 4 of the 6 references to the law in the book of Proverbs, 4 of the 6, will occur in this one chapter. There's real emphasis on them returning back to the law, which makes sense that this is in the portion of Proverbs that were gathered together by King Hezekiah. Remember, there was a great revival and a return to the law under him. All right, first one. The wicked flee. So not the fool, not the sluggard, the wicked. So right out of the bat, we see it happening. But no one pursues. No one's chasing after them, but they're running anyway. But the righteous, they don't flee. They are bold like a lion. The guilty flees when no one pursues. But here's the more convicting idea, because we understand this, right? We understand that idea. But here's the greater idea. Do you have to hide what you're doing from God? The wicked flees when no one pursues. So if you have to hide it from the Lord and from others, should you be doing it in the first place? Verse 2. By the rebellion of a land, her rulers increase, but by a person of intelligence who knows justice, it will last. Now, when it talks about rulers increase, doesn't mean that they keep getting more stuff and they get more land. The idea is that we keep having more rulers and more rulers and more rulers. The idea is prince after prince after prince. The New Living Translation puts this one this way. When there is more rot within a nation, its government topples easily. This could be a reference to 2 Kings chapter 15. 2 Kings chapter 15, when in the northern kingdom, we had a slew of assassinations and people being deposed. So they had king after king after king. Why? Because there was more rot, there was rebellion in the land, and that's why their rulers increased. But if you just had one person with a brain in their head who knows justice, then you can have just one king ruling the people. Beware a divided land where everyone follows a different leader. Boy, do we see that in our politics today. Instead, yearn and pray for wise leaders who have a heart for justice. Verse 3. A man who is poor and oppresses the impoverished, So they're poor, and they're picking on other poor people. They're like a beating rain that leaves no food. So the water comes, it should bring us food, right? But it just keeps beating everything down, so it destroys the crops as it passes through. And they're like, dude, you're poor. Why are you oppressing other poor people? Verse 4 and 5 go together as well. Here we go. Those who forsake instruction will praise the wicked. So these are those who have rejected the law. They've left the way of holiness, as it were. And so they turn around to the wicked and they go, you guys are doing a great job. But they who guard instruction, so they take the law and they place it in their heart and they hold it fast, will struggle against them, meaning against the wicked. Verse 5, men of evil do not understand justice, but seekers of Yahweh understand, the idea is justice, understand justice completely. Here's the application for us. We are not permitted to remain silent when we see evil. This verse speaks to our current day as the worldly praise those who claim to be this or that. So many praise wickedness, for they have abandoned the law of God. And yes, we don't make every single fight our fight, but when the fight comes to you in your presence, God expects you to speak up. We are not allowed to just stand by, not live and let live. Like it or not, we are called to strive against the wicked. The word for strive is an action verb. It means to grate against. Like you have a hunk of cheese and the grater is just going at it to contend with. We will see this very strongly in Proverbs 31, 8 and 9. Proverbs 31, 8 and 9. Open your mouth for the mute. Open your mouth, defend the rights of those who are weak. Verse 6. Better to be poor and walking in one integrity than to be crooked of ways when one is rich. Now, this may or may not be related to verse 5 that we had come before, right? To speak up, to strive against what is wicked. But we do have a beautiful application here. It's better to be poor and walking in integrity. So don't cheat the system, don't be a thief, just do what you're supposed to do, even if you don't make much. Just be honest. But here's the idea as well. Even if it costs you every material thing to strive against the wicked, do it. Because it is better to be poor with your integrity than to be rich and with the wicked. This is an echo of Proverbs 19:1. Better is a poor man who walks in his integrity than the one who is perverse in speech and is a fool. Verse 7. He who keeps instruction, so again, holding on to the law, is a child of understanding. But the companion of gluttons will shame his father. Verse 8. He who augments his wealth with interest and with usury. So the idea is that they're loaning to other Israelites, which is a violation of Leviticus 25:36. Leviticus 25:36. You are allowed to loan money. Do not charge interest if they're your fellow Israelite. Just as God didn't charge you interest when he brought you out of Egypt, don't do it to your brothers and sisters. But what this person is doing is they're trying to get wealthy, to augment their wealth, to bring more in by charging interest and usury. But what we find out is that you're really just gathering it for the one who is actually kind to the poor. This is an echo of Proverbs 13:22. Proverbs 13:22. The wicked store up riches, but God transfers those riches to the righteous. The Lord will give it to the one who's actually generous to the poor. Verse 9. He who turns his ear from listening to instruction, even his prayer is an abomination. God will tell this to Israel multiple times, right? When they reject him, they demand salvation or they demand a king. You cannot expect that God will incline his ear to you if your heart is far from him. Verse 10. He who misleads the upright onto the way of evil. So the idea is that they're walking on the path where they're supposed to, and the wicked person comes up, grabs them, and puts them on a different path. Into his pits, his own pits, he will fall. But as for the blameless, they will inherit good. Verse 11. A man of wealth is wise in his own eyes. Right? The rich people think they can do whatever they want to do because they have money. I have money. Clearly, I'm making all the good decisions. And I'm not saying everyone who has wealth is like this. I'm saying the person who trusts in their riches. This is the Proverbs 18:11 person, the person who thinks their money and their wealth is a fortress. But God goes, it's only a fortress in your imagination. It's only a high wall in your own head. But even the intelligent poor, which is what we see here in verse 11, but the intelligent poor sees through him. Verse 12. When the righteous triumphs, great is the glory. But with the rising of wicked, a person will be hidden. We will see this again in 29:2, Proverbs 29:2. When the righteous win, then everybody comes out. There's a huge celebrations. Everyone's excited, right? So the glory increases. We'll see later on the righteous will abound, right? There'll be lots of, everyone will come out of the woodwork. No one will have to hide. But when wicked rises up, when they're in charge, everybody hides themselves. The people will hide when the wicked are in charge. Verse 13. He who conceals his transgression will not prosper. Now, the idea is not that you that love covers transgression, a multitude of wrongs, right? And you're forgiving it and you're not bringing it up. That's not the idea here. The idea here is that you're trying to hide your sin. And because you're trying to hide your sin, God will not prosper you. But he who confesses and forsakes. So these are both sides of repentance. Repentance isn't just turning away, and it's not just admitting, okay, this was wrong. You have to do both. You have to agree with God that this is sin, and I reject it, and then turn away from it and turn towards God. And the one who confesses and forsakes, so the totality of repentance, will obtain mercy. Again, 1 John 1:9, it is a Christian bar of soap. Our God is a good God. If you confess your sins to him, he is faithful and just to forgive you and cleanse you from all unrighteousness. 1 John 1:9. Verse 14. Happy is the person who fears continuously, so fears the Lord. But he who is stubborn of heart will fall into calamity. 15 and 16 go together. Now we're talking about rulers, especially wicked rulers. Like a roaring lion and a charging bear is a wicked ruler over a poor people. The lion's roaring, but why? The bear's charging, but what are you going to do? Everyone's already beaten down. Verse 16, a ruler who lacks understanding is a cruel oppressor, but those who hate unjust gain will have long days. Verse 17, a person who is burdened with the blood of another. So the idea here is they have caused the death of somebody. So now they're guilty. Their blood is upon them. Until death, he will flee. Now that makes sense. Do not take hold of them is how the LEB translates it. But when you go and look at other translations, the words literally are, don't put your hand on them. That's literally the Hebrew words. But the idea is what the other translations try to bring up while they're trying to make sense of the text for you. The idea is don't support them. Don't take them by the hand and go, okay, I'll give you safe harbor. It says, no, just let them go. Do not support them. Let them keep running. Remember, the guilty flees until they are put to death. This seems to be harmonious and an application of Numbers 35:17, Numbers 35:17, in that section about the cities of refuge. The murderer must die for their sin. Verse 18. He who walks in integrity will be safe, but he who takes crooked paths will fall in one. And when it says in one, the idea is not in one pit. The idea is that everything seems to be going great, and then just one day, it stops. In 1 second, in one moment, everything's just undone. Yeah, could you turn that light off for me? Yes, it's going to make me dizzy up here. Verse 19. He who tills his ground will have plenty of bread, but he who follows fantasies will have plenty of poverty. Again, we have the bringing up of the rules, Solomon's rules for financial success. Work hard, avoid foolish debt, and live a righteous life before the Lord. Hard work works. If you till your ground, if you do what you're supposed to do, and I know it's mundane, I know it's hard work, but do what you need to do and you'll have plenty of bread. But the one who follows fantasies, every get-rich-quick scheme, the scratch-offs are going to make it, and this is how I'm going to make rent. The only thing you will end up with plenty of is poverty. Verse 20. A man of faithfulness has abundant blessings, but he who hurries, so we just saw this, he who hurries to become rich will not go unpunished. Do not pursue riches over faithfulness. That's the choice in this particular one. God comes first. Follow God, and then your providence is God's responsibility. Doesn't mean you won't have to work for it. We saw that in the previous proverb. But opportunity and hence the providence will flow from him. Verse 21. Showing partiality is not good, and over a morsel of bread a strong man will do wrong. First part, James chapter 2, totally makes sense. Do not show partiality. But here's the sad part. The idea of a strong man is a person who has means. They don't have to bend for anything, right? They're the person in charge, the leader, etc. But over even a bite of bread, they will compromise. This is how dangerous it is. You don't need it. You're a strong person. But because of that, you will still sin. Beware being a respecter of persons. Verse 22. He who hurries for wealth is a man with an evil eye, but he does not know that poverty will come upon him. Echo of verse 20. Verse 23. He who rebukes a person will afterward find more favor than he who flatters with the tongue. Don't trust somebody who flatters you. Don't trust somebody who always seems to just have these glowing words for you, and even you kind of go, well, that can't be accurate. The person who rebukes you will probably be more honest to you and do better for you, even if it hurts. And that's why they will find more favor. They're probably being more honest with you. Sometimes the hard word, when said correctly and in love, will result in a stronger bond, because faithful are the wounds of a friend. Proverbs 27:6. Verse 24. He who robs his father and his mother and says there is no crime is a partner to a man who corrupts. What we see here is one who is robbing from their parents by denying them what it is that they need. But he denies it's a sin. And we already saw this. If you conceal your sin, you will not prosper. But Jesus will call the religious elite out on this on Matthew 15 when he says certain things you have said, oh, this is Korban. It's dedicated to God. Matthew 15, right? But you do this so that you corrupt the law and you corrupt your responsibility and you defile the commandments in order to protect your traditions. This is the issue, what you've done. Verse 25. The greedy person will stir up strife. Now, we saw before what stirs up strife. The whisperer, the one who starts contentions. And now we understand why. They're not bringing the whisperers because they just want to educate everybody else. They're greedy. They want top billing. They want to be the guy in charge. They want to be the one to control everything. The greedy person will stir up strife. But he who trusts in Yahweh, just trust the Lord, that one will be enriched. Verse 26. He who trusts in his own heart is a fool. Jeremiah 17:9. Jeremiah 17:9. The heart is deceitfully wicked. Other than God, can anybody know their own heart? This is the statement of the fool. Oh, I know what I'm doing. I know my path. I know my truth. If you trust in your own heart, you're a fool. But he who walks in wisdom will be saved. Verse 27. He who gives to the poor, there is no lacking. But for he who turns his eyes, who pretends, I don't see anything going on, there are many curses. Here's the application. Be generous. Be generous to a fault. Don't be foolish, but be generous to a fault. Most importantly, don't pretend you don't see. That is a violation, Deuteronomy 22:1. Deuteronomy 22:1. Don't pretend that you don't see what's going on. The Lord may not lead you to do anything at that moment. He's the king. He knows what he has going on. Let him speak. But don't say to yourself, well, not my monkey, not my circus. Do not pretend that you do not see it. He who pretends he does not see the poor will be punished due to his lack of mercy. Proverbs 21:13. 21:13. Verse 28. With the rising of the wicked, humankind will be hidden. We saw this before. When the wicked get into power, everybody hides. But when they perish, right, with their perishing, when they're done away with, when the wicked are done away with, the righteous will multiply. All of a sudden, all the righteous come out of the woodwork because they don't have to hide anymore. That is where we will end tonight with 28. The next time we gather together, so not this next week, but the week after, we will pick up in chapter 29, and Lord willing, we will finish out the book of Proverbs, and then we will go through, we will continue in the rest of the Bible. If you're not reading ahead, please read ahead. You should be all the way into Isaiah at the very least, if not knocking on the door of Jeremiah. We have a lot of chapters of the prophets to go through, and if you have not read in advance, it is going to feel very confusing to you. So, Heavenly Father, we love you. We thank you for your grace, the beauty of your word.